What if everything we think we know about the first humans is only part of the story? Long before cities, kingdoms, or even written history, our earliest ancestors faced a world unlike anything we can imagine. But who were they? Where did they come from? And what secrets have vanished forever? Today we'll journey back hundreds of thousands of years to uncover one of humanity's greatest mysteries. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications because every week we explore the forgotten stories that shaped our world. Now let's travel to the very beginning of humanity. The first footprints appear long before the first city, the first kingdom, or even the first story told around a fire. They press softly into ancient mud beneath the sky, unlike the one above the modern world surrounded by animals that no longer exist, and landscapes that have changed beyond recognition. Rain falls across broad grasslands broken by scattered forests. Rivers wander through valleys that will one day become deserts. Volcanoes rise on the horizon, quietly reshaping the land over thousands of years. Somewhere within this immense African landscape, a small group of upright figures moves across damp ground, leaving behind impressions so ordinary in their own time that no one notices them. Millions of years later, those same footprints become one of the most precious clues ever discovered, a silent reminder that the greatest mystery in human history begins not with monuments or written records, but with a few fragile marks preserved by extraordinary chance. Every civilization eventually asks where people came from. Ancient cultures answered with creation stories, divine ancestors, sacred mountains, or heavenly gardens. Those stories carried profound meaning for the societies that preserved them, yet archaeology and anthropology follow a different path. Instead of legends, they search through layers of rock fossilized bone fragments of ancient camps and microscopic traces hidden within caves. Each discovery adds another piece to an enormous puzzle, but the picture remains incomplete. The evidence survives only because unusual circumstances protect it against weather erosion scavengers and the relentless passage of time. Countless generations lived and died without leaving anything that could endure for millions of years. What survives in the archaeological record is only a tiny fraction of an unimaginably long human story. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The search for the first humans is not really a search for one individual. There was never a single moment when one creature suddenly became human, while its parents remained something else. Evolution does not work through dramatic transformations in a single generation. Instead, it unfolds gradually across hundreds of thousands of years, with each generation differing only slightly from the last. Tiny changes accumulate so slowly that no individual notices them. Yet after millions of years, those nearly invisible differences produce entirely new forms of life. This slow process makes the question surprisingly difficult. Who exactly should be called the first human? Scholars still debate where that boundary should be drawn because nature rarely creates perfectly clear dividing lines. Even the word human carries different meanings depending on the question being asked. Some researchers reserve it only for members of the genus Homo. Others extend the definition to earlier upright walking ancestors that already possessed many recognizably human characteristics. Genetic evidence, fossil anatomy, and archaeological discoveries each illuminate different parts of the story, but none provides every answer. No single explanation fully accounts for the transition, because evolution resembles the branching limbs of an ancient tree rather than a straight line leading inevitably toward modern humanity. For much of recorded history, people imagined that humanity had always existed much as it does today. The true depth of human time remained invisible beneath layers of soil and stone. Even as scientific thinking advanced during the 18th and 19th centuries, few suspected that human ancestors stretched back millions rather than thousands of years. The first fossil discoveries often confused rather than clarified the picture. Bones unlike those of any living person emerged from caves and ancient sediments. Some appeared strangely robust, others possessed smaller brains or unusual facial features. At first, scholars argued endlessly about what these remains represented. Some dismissed them as diseased modern humans. Others believed they belonged to entirely separate creations. Only gradually did a remarkable realization emerge. Humanity possessed a deep evolutionary history filled with forgotten relatives. Africa became the heart of this unfolding story, not because researchers expected it to be, but because the land itself preserved extraordinary evidence. The East African rift slowly pulled apart over millions of years, exposing ancient geological layers that would otherwise remain buried far below the surface. Volcanic eruptions spread fine ash across landscapes before hardening into protective layers. Rivers deposited sediments that gently covered bones left behind by animals and early hominins. Later, erosion exposed these buried archives once again, allowing modern scientists to read chapters of history that would have disappeared almost everywhere else on Earth. Among the most remarkable discoveries are fossilized footprints preserved beneath ancient volcanic ash. Unlike skeletons, footprints capture a fleeting moment rather than an entire lifetime. They reveal movement instead of anatomy. They preserve behavior instead of appearance alone. A single trail can suggest walking speed, body size, group composition, and even social relationships. Some trackways indicate adults traveling beside smaller individuals. Others reveal confident, upright walking across open ground millions of years before large human brains evolved. The evidence remains incomplete, yet these traces suggest that walking on two legs became established surprisingly early in the human story. Bones tell equally remarkable stories. Teeth preserve microscopic wear that reveals ancient diets. Leg bones indicate whether an individual climbed trees regularly or spent most of life walking across open landscapes. Skull fragments hint at brain size and facial structure. Chemical signatures locked within fossil enamel sometimes preserve clues about climate and seasonal movement. Every specimen becomes a conversation across immense spans of time, although each conversation remains frustratingly brief. Entire populations vanish from the record, leaving only scattered fragments separated by thousands of years and hundreds of kilometers. This incompleteness shapes nearly every mystery surrounding the first humans. Entire species may have existed without leaving fossils that survive today. Others may have occupied regions where geological conditions destroyed nearly every trace. New discoveries repeatedly overturn long-standing assumptions. A single jawbone, a handful of teeth, or a fragment of skull can reshape evolutionary family trees that seemed secure only months earlier. What appears certain today may require revision tomorrow as fresh evidence emerges from beneath ancient sediments. Yet amid this uncertainty, one conclusion stands remarkably firm. Humanity's origins reach far deeper into time than almost anyone imagined only a few generations ago. The first chapters unfold not among cities' agriculture or written language, but within changing African landscapes where climate, geography, predators, and opportunity constantly reshape the lives of our distant ancestors. They lived without knowing they stood at the beginning of a story that would eventually spread across every continent, transform entire ecosystems, and even carry descendants beyond Earth itself. The mystery endures because those earliest people never intended to leave a record. They simply survived from one season to the next, adapting to changing environments that demanded resilience more than brilliance. Their tools were simple, their communities small and their horizons limited by the landscapes before them. Yet hidden within those modest beginnings lay the foundations of everything that followed. Every language, every civilization, every scientific discovery, and every work of art ultimately traces its lineage back to these ancient populations whose names will never be known. Their world has vanished almost completely, but scattered across Africa, preserved within stone ash bone, and even the DNA carried by living people, enough fragments remain to begin reconstructing one of the greatest stories ever uncovered, the long uncertain journey toward becoming human. The landscapes that nurture the earliest human ancestors bear little resemblance to the Africa that exists today. Modern maps suggest familiar coastlines, deserts and mountain ranges, but over millions of years the continent changes constantly. Forests expand and retreat. Lakes appear, grow into inland seas and vanish again. Rivers carve new valleys before abandoning them entirely. Grasslands spread across regions once covered by dense woodland, only to surrender once more when wetter climates return. The first humans do not evolve in a stable world. They emerge within one of the most dynamic environments on Earth, where survival depends less on strength than on the ability to adapt to relentless change. The engine behind much of this transformation lies beneath the surface. Deep inside the Earth, immense tectonic forces slowly pull Eastern Africa apart. This process, known today as the East African Rift, unfolds almost too slowly for any living creature to perceive, yet over millions of years it reshapes an entire continent. Volcanoes rise where none existed before. Earthquakes fracture ancient plains. New valleys sink while neighboring highlands lift toward the sky. Freshwater lakes fill deep basins, creating rich ecosystems that attract enormous concentrations of wildlife. Ash from repeated volcanic eruptions settles across the land, later becoming one of archaeology's greatest allies by preserving ancient footprints and providing geological time markers that allow scientists to estimate the ages of fossils with remarkable precision. Climate adds another layer of unpredictability. Africa during the age of early hominins experiences repeated cycles of wetter and drier conditions driven by subtle shifts in Earth's orbit, changing ocean currents and global temperatures. A region that supports lush forests for thousands of years may gradually transform into open savanna. Then, after another climatic shift, woodlands return. These transitions rarely happen overnight, but across countless generations they alter the balance of food predators and available shelter. Animals either adapt, migrate, or disappear. For the earliest members of the human family, these changing environments present both danger and opportunity. Dense forests provide abundant fruit leaves and protection among the trees, but they also limit visibility and movement. Open grasslands expose individuals to predators, yet they offer access to new food sources and long-distance travel. Neither landscape is permanently superior. Instead, survival increasingly favors flexibility. The evidence remains incomplete, but many researchers believe this environmental instability helps shape some of the defining characteristics that later distinguish humans from other primates. Walking upright becomes especially valuable in such mixed environments. Standing on two legs allows an individual to see over tall grasses, spot approaching predators, carry food over longer distances, and travel more efficiently between scattered patches of woodland. Scholars still debate exactly why bipedalism evolves, and no single explanation fully accounts for it. Some emphasize energy efficiency. Others point toward improved thermoregulation under intense sunlight, or the ability to transport infants and gathered food. The reality is likely a combination of many small advantages rather than one dramatic breakthrough. Predators dominate these ancient landscapes. Saber-toothed cats stalk through vegetation with patience refined over millions of years. Giant hyenas possess crushing jaws capable of splintering massive bones. Crocodiles wait motionless in rivers before exploding into violent motion. Enormous eagles may even target young hominins. Survival demands constant awareness. Unlike many predators, early human ancestors possess neither sharp claws nor exceptional speed. Their greatest strengths develop gradually through cooperation, observation, and increasingly sophisticated behavior. The herbivores sharing these ecosystems are equally impressive. Ancient elephants tower above modern species. Massive buffalo graze alongside herds of antelope stretching toward distant horizons. Early giraffes browse scattered trees while rhinoceroses move through dense vegetation. Some animals resemble familiar modern forms, while others belong to evolutionary branches that eventually vanish without descendants. Every season brings migrations following fresh vegetation created by changing rainfall. For small bands of early hominins, these migrations influence where food becomes available and where danger follows. Water shapes nearly every aspect of existence. Rivers provide drinking water, edible plants, fish, and access to animals gathering along their banks. Lakes support astonishing biodiversity, attracting birds, reptiles, mammals, and insects in enormous numbers. During dry periods, shrinking water sources concentrate both prey and predators into increasingly crowded spaces. Competition intensifies. Disease spreads more easily. Yet these same locations also preserve remarkable archaeological evidence. Sediments slowly accumulate around ancient shorelines, burying bones and stone tools that survive long after the surrounding landscape transforms beyond recognition. Plants form an equally important part of daily survival, although they rarely fossilize as readily as bones. Fruits, roots, tubers, seeds, nuts, and tender shoots likely supply much of the diet for many early hominins. Microscopic analysis of fossil teeth reveals scratches and chemical signatures suggesting that diets shift repeatedly as environments change. Some populations consume tougher grasses and sedges during dry periods. Others rely more heavily on woodland resources when forests expand. This dietary flexibility may become one of humanity's earliest advantages, allowing small groups to persist where more specialized animals struggle. Fire has not yet entered the story in any reliable way. Nights belong largely to darkness. Sunset changes the rhythm of life immediately. Temperatures fall. Sounds become more ominous as nocturnal predators begin hunting. The stars appear with astonishing clarity above landscapes untouched by artificial light, but they offer little protection against danger hidden within the shadows. Small groups likely remain close together, relying on vigilance rather than technology to survive until dawn. Perhaps the most remarkable feature of this world is its sheer timescale. Changes that seem dramatic to modern observers often unfold across thousands of generations. A forest does not vanish within a lifetime, but slowly retreats as rainfall patterns evolve. Rivers gradually shift course. Mountains rise almost imperceptibly. Evolution itself keeps pace with this slow transformation. Each generation inherits a world only slightly different from the one experienced by its parents, yet after millions of years, both landscapes and their inhabitants become almost unrecognizable. This deep connection between environmental change and human evolution remains one of the central themes of paleoanthropology. Early humans do not simply endure nature, they are shaped by it in countless subtle ways. Their anatomy, behavior, diet, mobility, and social organization all respond to pressures created by shifting climates and changing ecosystems. What survives in the fossil record suggests that adaptability becomes increasingly important long before intelligence reaches its modern form. The mystery of the first humans therefore cannot be separated from the mystery of the world they inhabit. Every fossil, every footprint, and every stone tool reflects not only an individual life, but an entire environment that no longer exists. To understand those ancient ancestors requires imagining Africa not as a fixed backdrop, but as a living, evolving landscape, one constantly testing every creature within it. In that restless world where forests became grasslands and lakes appeared only to disappear again, the earliest chapters of humanity slowly unfolded, guided less by destiny than by countless small adaptations accumulated across unimaginable stretches of time. Long before anyone could be called fully human, before stone tools scattered across riverbanks or fire illuminated the darkness, the evolutionary story already stretches back through millions of years of gradual change. The search for the earliest human relatives leads not to a single ancestor, but to a growing collection of remarkable fossils, each representing a different branch of an immense family tree. Some branches flourish for hundreds of thousands of years before ending without descendants. Others leave only a handful of bones before disappearing into silence. Together they reveal that humanity does not emerge from one dramatic event, but from an intricate web of populations adapting to an ever-changing world. One of the earliest candidates appears around 7 million years ago. Fossils discovered in Central Africa belong to a creature known as Sahelanthropus chadensis. At first glance, the skull seems surprisingly ape-like, with a small brain comparable to that of modern chimpanzees. Yet one feature immediately captures scientific attention. The opening where the spinal column connects to the skull sits farther forward than expected, suggesting that the head balances differently than in typical quadrupedal apes. Some researchers interpret this as evidence of habitual upright posture. Others argue that the evidence remains too limited to draw firm conclusions. Scholars still debate exactly where Sahelanthropus belongs on the human family tree, illustrating how even the oldest discoveries rarely provide simple answers. Only a few 100,000 years later, another possible ancestor appears in the fossil record. Known as Orrorin tuganensis, these remains come from what is now Kenya. The fossils are frustratingly incomplete, consisting primarily of fragments of leg bones, teeth, and parts of the jaw. Yet the femur tells an intriguing story. Its internal structure resembles that of creatures adapted for walking on two legs, while other anatomical features suggest that climbing remains an important part of daily life. Rather than choosing entirely between life in the trees or life on the ground, these early hominins likely move comfortably through both worlds. The pattern becomes even clearer with the discovery of Ardipithecus ramidus, often simply called Ardi. Living approximately 4.4 million years ago, Ardi occupies an important place in understanding early human evolution, because her skeleton preserves an unusually complete picture of the body. She possesses grasping feet capable of climbing trees efficiently, yet her pelvis shows adaptations consistent with upright walking. This combination surprises many scientists when it is first analyzed. Evolution does not replace one lifestyle instantly with another. Instead, it blends old and new characteristics across immense spans of time. Ardi also transforms another long-held assumption. For decades, researchers imagined that the last common ancestor shared by humans and chimpanzees probably resembles modern chimpanzees quite closely. Ardi challenges that idea. Her anatomy suggests that both humans and chimpanzees evolve substantially after their evolutionary paths separate. Neither species represents a frozen image of the common ancestor. Both continue changing in different directions over millions of years. Around 4 million years ago, another remarkable group enters the story. These are the Australopithecines, whose fossils become increasingly abundant across eastern and southern Africa. Among them, perhaps none is more famous than Australopithecus afarensis. One skeleton discovered in Ethiopia during the 1970s becomes known worldwide by the nickname Lucy. Although only about 40% complete, Lucy provides one of the clearest windows into an early upright walker. Standing little more than 1 meter tall, Lucy appears physically unimposing compared with modern humans. Her brain remains relatively small, closer in size to that of a chimpanzee than to later members of the genus Homo. Yet her legs, hips, and spine unmistakably demonstrate efficient bipedal walking. At the same time, her long arms and curved finger bones indicate that climbing continues to play a significant role in daily survival. She belongs to a world where trees remain valuable refuges from predators, even as increasing time is spent moving across the ground. The famous footprints discovered at Letoli in present-day Tanzania provide independent confirmation of this upright lifestyle. Preserved beneath layers of volcanic ash, approximately 3.6 million years old, the trackway records several individuals walking across soft ground after a volcanic eruption. The impressions reveal arches in the feet, forward-pointing toes, and a walking pattern remarkably similar to that of modern humans. Although scholars continue debating exactly which species leaves these footprints, many researchers believe Australopithecus afarensis is the most likely candidate. These footprints capture something fossils rarely can. They preserve behavior frozen within a single afternoon millions of years ago. Some interpretations suggest two adults walk together, while a smaller individual follows behind. Other researchers argue that several adults travel as a group. The evidence remains incomplete, yet the trackway hints at social lives unfolding beyond what bones alone can reveal. It is an intimate glimpse into ordinary existence preserved by extraordinary geological luck. Despite these advances, the Australopithecines remain very different from modern humans. Their brains are modest in size. They probably lack the sophisticated technology and symbolic behavior that appear much later. Their survival depends heavily upon understanding seasonal landscapes, recognizing edible plants, avoiding predators, and maintaining strong social bonds within relatively small groups. Intelligence certainly plays an important role, but not yet on the scale associated with later human evolution. The fossil record also reveals that evolution during this period resembles a dense bush rather than a simple ladder. Multiple Australopithecine species coexist across different regions of Africa. Some adapt to woodland habitats, others thrive in more open environments. Certain populations develop massive jaws and specialized teeth capable of processing tough vegetation, while others maintain more generalized diets. Many of these branches ultimately disappear without contributing directly to modern humanity. This diversity reminds researchers that evolution does not plan ahead. No species knows whether its particular adaptations will prove successful thousands of generations into the future. Climate shifts, volcanic eruptions, disease competition, and simple chance all influence which populations survive. Some lineages flourish for hundreds of thousands of years before vanishing completely. Others remain small, but eventually give rise to descendants whose influence extends across the globe. Every new fossil discovery has the potential to reshape this picture. A jaw unearthed in Ethiopia, a skull fragment recovered in Chad, or a collection of teeth found in South Africa may force scientists to redraw evolutionary relationships once considered well established. New dating techniques occasionally revise ages by hundreds of thousands of years. Advanced imaging reveals anatomical details invisible when fossils were first discovered decades earlier. The story remains dynamic because the evidence itself continues to grow. What survives in the record suggests that the earliest human relatives are not primitive failures waiting to become modern humans. They are successful species in their own right, each exquisitely adapted to the environments they inhabit. Their lives span millions of years, far longer than our own species has existed. Without them, however, the later emergence of the genus Homo would never become possible. They establish the foundation upon which every subsequent chapter of humanity is built, even if their names and faces disappear beneath the immense weight of time. Among all the changes that shape the earliest human story, none appears more ordinary at first glance than taking a single step. Walking is so familiar to modern people that it rarely invites reflection. Yet the ability to move comfortably on two legs becomes one of the most significant evolutionary developments in the history of humanity. Long before larger brains, sophisticated language, or complex societies emerge, the body itself begins changing in ways that quietly alter every aspect of survival. The mystery is not whether our ancestors walked upright, the fossil evidence leaves little doubt, but why this transformation happened in the first place. The oldest members of the human family almost certainly spend much of their lives in trees. Climbing provides safety from predators, access to fruit and places to sleep beyond the reach of many dangerous animals. Even after upright walking evolves, tree climbing does not disappear overnight. Fossils repeatedly show curved fingers, flexible shoulders, and grasping feet that remain well suited for life among branches. Evolution rarely abandons successful adaptations immediately. Instead, it modifies existing structures while older abilities gradually become less important. Scientists have proposed many explanations for the rise of bipedalism. One influential idea suggests that changing climates gradually reduce dense forests, forcing early hominins to travel farther between patches of woodland. Walking on two legs consumes less energy than moving on all fours over long distances for creatures with human-like anatomy. Even small improvements in efficiency could become significant over thousands of journeys in search of food and water. Individuals capable of traveling farther while expending less energy may enjoy a subtle but meaningful survival advantage. Another possibility focuses on visibility. Open grasslands introduce new dangers that dense forests largely conceal. Standing upright allows an individual to see above tall vegetation, spotting predators before they attack, and identifying distant food sources that would otherwise remain hidden. A brief glimpse across the horizon may provide enough warning to avoid a hunting lion, or enough opportunity to locate migrating herds. Heat may also play a surprisingly important role. The African sun is relentless, especially during dry seasons when shade becomes scarce. A creature walking upright exposes less of its body directly to the overhead sun, while lifting much of its torso into cooler moving air. This posture reduces heat absorption and improves the body's ability to regulate temperature through sweating. Some researchers argue that these advantages become increasingly valuable as early hominins begin spending more time traveling across open landscapes during the hottest hours of the day, when many predators rest in the shade. The ability to carry objects offers yet another advantage. Hands freed from constant use in walking can transport food, useful stones, sticks, or infants. Modern observers often imagine carrying tools as the primary benefit, but long before sophisticated technology develops, simply bringing valuable food back to companions could strengthen social cooperation. A mother carrying a young child while also transporting gathered plants, or an individual bringing scavenged meat to relatives, gains possibilities unavailable to creatures dependent upon all four limbs for movement. None of these explanations alone appears sufficient. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate which selective pressures prove most influential. Increasingly, many scientists believe upright walking evolves not because of one overwhelming advantage, but because it offers numerous small benefits simultaneously. Over millions of years, those modest improvements accumulate, until walking on two legs becomes the defining characteristic of an entire evolutionary lineage. The skeleton itself records this extraordinary transformation in remarkable detail. The human spine develops a distinctive curved shape that balances the upper body efficiently over the hips. The pelvis becomes shorter and broader, providing stable attachment points for muscles, responsible for balance during single-legged steps. The femur angles inward toward the knees, allowing the body's center of gravity to remain directly above the feet while walking. Knees strengthen to bear greater weight, while the foot gradually loses its grasping function and develops rigid arches capable of absorbing repeated impacts across long distances. Every one of these anatomical adjustments seems relatively minor in isolation. Together, however, they produce one of the most efficient long-distance walking bodies among mammals. Ironically, humans become exceptional endurance walkers rather than exceptional sprinters. Compared with many predators, even modern people are relatively slow over short distances, yet they can continue moving for hours under conditions that exhaust many larger animals. Some anthropologists suggest that this endurance eventually contributes to an ancient hunting strategy known as persistence hunting. In this method, small groups pursue prey over extended distances until the animal overheats and can no longer escape. Direct evidence for such behavior during the earlier stages of human evolution remains uncertain, but later human populations in parts of Africa demonstrate that this remarkable strategy is indeed possible. It illustrates how anatomy that originally evolves for one purpose may later support entirely different behaviors. Walking upright also changes how early hominins interact socially. Individuals moving across open landscapes can remain visually connected over greater distances than those hidden within dense forests. Carrying resources encourages sharing. Longer journeys require memory of seasonal water sources and safe travel routes. Young offspring must keep pace with increasingly mobile groups, placing greater importance on cooperation among adults. These changes unfold gradually across immense spans of time, yet together they begin reshaping the rhythm of daily life. The famous Laetoli footprints continue offering subtle insights into this transformation. Careful analysis suggests that the walkers move with a confident, efficient gait, rather than awkward experimentation. Their stride appears relaxed, indicating that upright walking is already deeply established by this point in evolution. They are not learning to walk. They belong to a species for whom bipedal movement has become entirely natural. Yet their world remains dangerous. Walking upright does not eliminate vulnerability. Lions, giant hyenas, crocodiles, and other predators still possess overwhelming physical advantages. Early hominins survive not because they become stronger than their competitors, but because they increasingly combine mobility with awareness, flexibility, and cooperation. Their bodies continue reflecting both worlds, capable walkers on the ground, competent climbers in the trees. The gradual refinement of bipedalism also influences future evolutionary possibilities in unexpected ways. Efficient movement across greater distances expands access to new environments. Hands freed from locomotion become available for increasingly precise manipulation of objects. Changes in posture alter childbirth, forcing later adaptations as brain size begins expanding. Even the shape of the rib cage and shoulders evolves alongside these developments. One seemingly simple change begins setting countless others into motion. What survives in the fossil record suggests that upright walking is not merely another anatomical feature. It becomes the foundation upon which much of later human evolution is built. Before larger brains transform thought, before language reshapes communication, before tools revolutionize survival, there is simply the quiet rhythm of footsteps crossing ancient Africa. Those footsteps carry generations into unfamiliar landscapes, opening opportunities that none of their ancestors could have imagined. They do not yet know they are beginning humanity's longest journey, but with every measured stride, the path toward becoming fully human grows a little clearer. Walking on two legs changes where early humans can go, but another transformation gradually changes what they can imagine. It begins almost invisibly. Generation after generation, the skull grows slightly larger. The brain expands by only small amounts over immense stretches of time. No individual notices the difference, and no sudden leap separates one species from the next. Yet across millions of years, these tiny increments accumulate into one of evolution's most remarkable achievements. The human brain eventually becomes capable of planning far beyond the present moment, remembering distant landscapes, recognizing subtle patterns, and passing increasingly complex knowledge from one generation to another. Understanding how this extraordinary organ evolves remains one of the greatest puzzles in anthropology. The earliest hominins possess brains not much larger than those of modern chimpanzees. Australopithecines, including Lucy's species, generally have cranial capacities ranging between about 400 and 500 cubic centimeters. Modern humans average roughly 3 times that volume. At first glance, this dramatic difference seems to suggest a straightforward story of continual expansion. The reality is far more complicated. Brain size alone does not determine intelligence, and evolution does not simply reward larger brains without cost. The brain is an extraordinarily expensive organ. Although it accounts for only a small percentage of body weight in modern humans, it consumes roughly 1/5 of the body's energy while at rest. Every increase in brain size requires additional calories every single day. In harsh prehistoric environments where food availability fluctuates constantly, maintaining a larger brain presents a serious challenge. Evolution, therefore, cannot favor increased brain size unless the benefits consistently outweigh the enormous energetic costs. Researchers have proposed several explanations for how these costs are overcome. One influential idea is known as the expensive tissue hypothesis. It suggests that changes in diet, particularly increased consumption of energy-rich foods, such as meat, allow digestive systems to become somewhat smaller while freeing energy to support larger brains. Another possibility emphasizes cooking, although reliable evidence for controlled fire appears much later. Cooking makes many foods easier to digest and increases the calories that can be extracted from them, potentially supporting further brain expansion once fire becomes a regular part of human life. Social complexity offers another compelling explanation. Living within increasingly sophisticated groups demands constant mental effort. Individuals must remember relationships, recognize trustworthy companions, detect deception, care for offspring, and cooperate during dangerous situations. Every social interaction becomes an opportunity to strengthen or weaken survival prospects. Some anthropologists argue that navigating these intricate social networks provides powerful evolutionary pressure favoring enhanced cognitive abilities. This idea, sometimes called the social brain hypothesis, suggests that understanding other individuals may be as important as understanding the physical environment. Memory itself becomes a survival tool. Imagine an early human ancestor moving through a landscape where water disappears seasonally, edible plants ripen only briefly, and predators patrol familiar routes. Remembering where resources appear at different times of year offers a tremendous advantage. Those capable of building detailed mental maps can travel more efficiently, avoid unnecessary risks, and return repeatedly to productive locations. Over thousands of generations, natural selection may reward individuals possessing increasingly refined spatial memory. Problem-solving also grows in importance. Early hominins encounter constantly changing challenges, A familiar fruit tree no longer produces food. A river changes course after seasonal floods. Large scavengers arrive before a carcass can be reached. Flexible thinking allows individuals to develop alternative strategies rather than relying upon rigid instinct alone. The evidence remains incomplete, but fossil and archaeological discoveries increasingly suggest that behavioral adaptability becomes one of humanity's defining strengths long before civilization appears. The earliest members of the genus Homo begin appearing around 2.8 million years ago, although scholars continue debating the exact timing and relationships among these early species. Their brains remain modest by modern standards, yet they show noticeable enlargement compared with earlier Australopithecines. This shift does not happen in isolation. Changes in the hands, teeth, and body proportions accompany expanding cognitive capacity, suggesting that multiple aspects of evolution proceed together rather than independently. One particularly fascinating mystery concerns childhood. Human children today remain dependent upon adults for unusually long periods compared with most mammals. This prolonged development allows the growing brain to continue forming complex neural connections while absorbing enormous amounts of social and environmental information. Exactly when this extended childhood begins, evolving remains uncertain, but many researchers believe it gradually lengthens as brain complexity increases. Longer childhoods require greater parental investment and stronger cooperation within family groups, further reinforcing the importance of social bonds. Language almost certainly has not yet reached its modern form during these early stages, but communication is becoming increasingly sophisticated. Vocal calls, gestures, facial expressions, and shared attention likely combine to coordinate movement, warn of danger, and strengthen cooperation. Scholars still debate when fully developed language emerges because spoken words leave no direct fossil evidence. Instead, researchers rely upon indirect clues such as brain anatomy, genetics, and archaeological behavior. No single explanation fully accounts for the origin of language, making it one of the deepest mysteries in human evolution. The growth of intelligence also influences emotional life. Recognizing individual relationships, anticipating future events, mourning lost companions, and caring for vulnerable offspring all require increasingly complex mental processes. While it is impossible to know exactly what early humans think or feel, modern primates already demonstrate empathy, cooperation, grief, curiosity, and problem-solving abilities. These shared traits suggest that many emotional foundations of humanity begin developing long before modern humans appear. Interestingly, bigger brains do not eliminate uncertainty or guarantee success. Many intelligent human relatives eventually disappear despite possessing substantial cognitive abilities. Evolution rewards adaptation to immediate environments rather than abstract intelligence alone. A species perfectly suited to one climate may struggle when conditions shift dramatically. Another may thrive briefly, before being replaced by populations better adapted to new ecological pressures. Intelligence becomes one important tool among many rather than an automatic guarantee of survival. Ancient skulls preserve subtle evidence of these gradual transformations. The forehead slowly becomes less sloping. Brain cases enlarge. Facial structures begin changing as diet, social behavior, and developmental patterns evolve. Each fossil captures only a single individual, yet together they reveal a remarkably consistent long-term trend toward increasing neurological complexity. This trend unfolds over millions of years with countless pauses, reversals, and regional variations, reminding researchers that evolution rarely follows a perfectly straight path. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of brain evolution is that it does not simply create greater intelligence, it creates greater flexibility. Early humans become increasingly capable of responding creatively to unfamiliar situations, rather than relying solely upon inherited instincts. This adaptability eventually allows descendants to survive in frozen tundra, tropical rainforests, high mountains, deserts and coastlines scattered across the globe. The first steps toward that extraordinary versatility begin here with slow changes hidden inside ancient skulls. What survives in the record suggests that the expanding brain does not transform humanity overnight. Instead, it quietly widens the range of possibilities available to each generation. Better memory, sharper observation, stronger cooperation, and more flexible thinking accumulate alongside anatomical change. Long before writing, agriculture, or cities reshape the world, the foundations of human intelligence are already taking form in small groups, moving across ancient African landscapes, carrying within their growing minds the potential for futures they could never have imagined. A sharp-edged stone lying beside an ancient river appears almost insignificant. To most animals, it is simply another piece of the landscape, no different from countless others scattered across the ground. To an early member of the human family, however, that same stone gradually becomes something else. It becomes an extension of the hand, a way to cut flesh, crack bones, shape wood, or prepare plants. With that realization, even in its simplest form, the relationship between humans and the natural world begins to change forever. Instead of adapting only through anatomy, our ancestors increasingly adapt through technology. The earliest known stone tools date to approximately 3.3 million years ago, discovered at a site called Lomekwi in present-day Kenya. These remarkably ancient implements surprise archaeologists because they appear even older than the earliest widely accepted members of the genus Homo. Large stone cores and heavy hammer stones bear unmistakable signs of deliberate shaping. Their edges are crude compared with later technologies, but they demonstrate purposeful action rather than accidental breakage. Exactly who creates these tools remains uncertain. Some researchers suggest that late Australopithecines or another close human relative are responsible. Others caution that the evidence is still limited. The tools themselves cannot identify their makers. No single explanation fully accounts for this early technological leap, yet the discovery reveals an important truth. The ability to modify stone may begin before large brains evolve and before modern humans appear. Several 100,000 years later, another technological tradition becomes widespread across Africa. Known as the Oldowan industry, these tools are simpler than many people imagine. A stone is struck carefully with another stone producing sharp flakes along predictable fracture lines. The remaining core may also serve as a useful implement. These flakes possess razor-like edges capable of slicing meat, scraping hides, cutting plants and opening animal carcasses far more efficiently than bare hands or teeth alone. To modern eyes, such tools may appear primitive. In reality, they represent a profound cognitive achievement. Producing even a simple cutting flake requires understanding that one object can intentionally transform another to create a desired result. The maker must select suitable raw materials, strike at appropriate angles, and recognize useful shapes among broken fragments. This process reflects planning rather than instinct alone. Archaeological sites reveal that early humans become increasingly selective in choosing stone. Not every rock fractures in useful ways. Fine-grained volcanic rocks, quartzite, flint and chert produce predictable sharp edges. In some locations, researchers discover that ancient toolmakers transport high-quality stone over considerable distances, rather than relying only upon whatever lies immediately nearby. Such behavior suggests memory, foresight, and knowledge of the surrounding landscape. Stone tools also transform diet. Before their widespread use, scavenging large animal carcasses presents enormous challenges. Thick hides and powerful tendons make access to nutritious meat difficult. Even when predators leave behind substantial remains, much of the carcass remains inaccessible without cutting implements. Sharp stone flakes solve this problem. They allow early humans to remove flesh quickly before competing scavengers arrive. Perhaps even more valuable is access to bone marrow. Large mammal bones contain calorie-rich marrow protected within dense outer walls. Heavy hammer stones enable early humans to crack these bones open after larger predators have finished feeding. Marrow provides fat, vitamins, and energy at times when plant foods become scarce. Some archaeologists argue that regular access to these nutrient-rich resources contributes to later brain expansion by supplying additional calories unavailable through plant-based diets alone. Whether early humans primarily hunt or scavenge remains a topic of continuing debate. Popular imagination often pictures fearless hunters confronting enormous prey across open plains. The archaeological evidence paints a more nuanced picture. Many early stone tool sites suggest opportunistic behavior rather than specialized hunting. Small groups likely exploit every available food source, gathering plants, collecting insects, scavenging carcasses, catching small animals, and occasionally participating in cooperative hunts when circumstances allow. This flexibility proves remarkably effective. Rather than depending upon one particular strategy, early humans exploit changing environments with unusual adaptability. During one season, edible roots may dominate the diet. During another, migratory animals provide fresh opportunities. Rivers yield fish, shellfish, and turtles where available. Such dietary diversity reduces vulnerability when individual food sources become unreliable. Toolmaking itself may also strengthen social learning. Unlike instinctive behaviors inherited genetically, stone tool production requires observation and practice. Young individuals almost certainly watch experienced adults selecting rocks, striking flakes, and using finished implements. Mistakes become opportunities for learning. Knowledge begins accumulating across generations, not through biological evolution alone, but through culture. This distinction is revolutionary. Biological evolution moves slowly, often requiring thousands of generations before significant anatomical changes spread through populations. Cultural knowledge can spread within days or years. A successful technique invented by one individual may quickly benefit an entire group without waiting for genetic change. Although early technology remains relatively simple for hundreds of thousands of years, this new method of adaptation eventually becomes one of humanity's greatest strengths. Archaeologists occasionally uncover ancient sites where dozens or even hundreds of stone flakes remain scattered across the ground, exactly where they fall, millions of years earlier. These locations resemble prehistoric workshops frozen in time. Broken cores, discarded fragments, unfinished tools, and animal bones create snapshots of daily activity. They reveal that toolmaking is not an occasional accident, but a repeated behavior woven into ordinary life. One particularly intriguing mystery concerns handedness. Modern humans display a strong preference for using the right hand, with most individuals naturally favoring it for skilled tasks. Microscopic wear patterns on ancient teeth and cut marks associated with stone tool use suggest that right-handedness may already be emerging among early members of the genus Homo. If correct, this implies that brain lateralization, the specialization of different brain regions for particular functions, has deep evolutionary roots extending far beyond recorded history. Stone tools also alter relationships with predators. Early humans remain physically vulnerable, yet sharp implements provide new options for defense, butchering, and resource competition. A carcass abandoned by lions can be processed quickly before hyenas arrive. Wooden digging sticks shaped with stone edges reach nutritious roots hidden beneath hard ground. Branches trimmed into simple spears may eventually serve purposes beyond gathering plants. Technology begins expanding the range of behaviors available to relatively fragile bodies. The pace of technological change during this era remains astonishingly slow by modern standards. Thousands of generations may produce only subtle refinements in tool design. Unlike later periods of rapid innovation, early stone technologies remain remarkably stable across immense spans of time. This stability suggests that simple flakes already fulfill many essential needs efficiently. Complex tools evolve only when environmental pressures and cognitive abilities make additional sophistication worthwhile. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that the first stone tools are far more than broken rocks. They mark the beginning of a new evolutionary strategy in which knowledge itself becomes an increasingly valuable resource. Muscles and teeth no longer determine survival alone. Intelligence, observation, memory, and shared experience gradually assume greater importance. From these humble fragments scattered across ancient African landscapes emerges a tradition of invention that will eventually produce everything from sewing needles to spacecraft. Yet at its beginning, it is simply one careful strike of stone against stone, echoing across a landscape where humanity is only beginning to discover its unique place in the natural world. For millions of years, the story of human evolution unfolds almost entirely within Africa. The continent provides the changing landscapes, shifting climates, and extraordinary diversity of environments that shape our earliest ancestors. Yet there comes a time when small groups begin moving beyond this ancient homeland. They do not leave because they understand they're making history. They do not know that their descendants will eventually reach every habitable continent on Earth. They simply follow rivers, coastlines, migrating animals, and the changing opportunities presented by a restless world. The first great human migration begins not as a grand expedition, but as countless ordinary journeys spread across thousands of generations. Exactly when the earliest humans first leave Africa remains one of paleoanthropology's most fascinating questions. The evidence continues to evolve with every major discovery. At present, the strongest archaeological evidence suggests that members of the species Homo erectus, or closely related early humans, begin expanding beyond Africa around 1.8 million years ago. Some disputed discoveries hint at even earlier dispersals, but the evidence remains incomplete, and scholars continue debating whether these older finds truly represent sustained migrations or isolated movements that leave little lasting impact. Among the most remarkable sites documenting this expansion is Dmanisi, located in what is now the nation of Georgia. Excavations there reveal remarkably well-preserved skulls, skeletons, and stone tools dating to approximately 1.8 million years ago. These individuals possess surprisingly small brains compared with later humans, yet they successfully inhabit environments far beyond tropical Africa. Their presence transforms scientific understanding. It demonstrates that sophisticated technology and large modern brains are not necessary prerequisites for leaving the continent. The Dmanisi fossils also reveal something unexpected about variation within early human populations. Several skulls differ noticeably in shape and size, leading some researchers initially to classify them as belonging to different species. Later analysis suggests they may instead represent natural variation within a single population. If correct, this finding reminds scientists that early humans, like modern people, display considerable diversity without necessarily belonging to separate species. Evolutionary boundaries remain blurred, reinforcing how difficult it can be to divide ancient populations into neat categories. Leaving Africa is not a single event, but a gradual process unfolding over immense stretches of time. Small groups likely move only modest distances during each generation. Children grow up knowing landscapes slightly farther from the ancestral homeland than their parents. Over centuries, those incremental movements accumulate into continental expansion. No individual walks from Eastern Africa to East Asia. Instead, countless generations extend the range of their communities step by step. Climate plays a central role in making these journeys possible. During certain periods, wetter conditions transform normally arid regions into hospitable corridors, rich with vegetation and wildlife. Grasslands spread across areas that later become harsh deserts. Rivers flow through landscapes now almost entirely dry. These temporary environmental windows create opportunities for migration that disappear when climates shift once again. The Sinai Peninsula and the southern Arabian Peninsula likely serve as important gateways linking Africa with Eurasia. Sea levels fluctuate dramatically during the ice ages, sometimes exposing broader coastal plains and narrowing water crossings. Although no single migration route explains every movement, these regions provide natural pathways connecting continents. Ancient coastlines that once supported human populations often lie beneath today's seas, hiding valuable archaeological evidence beneath layers of sediment. The earliest migrants encounter environments unlike anything their ancestors have known. Instead of African savannas stretching toward distant horizons, they enter temperate woodlands, mountain valleys, rocky plateaus, and eventually colder climates marked by seasonal frost. Every new habitat presents unfamiliar plants, animals, and weather patterns. Flexibility once again becomes humanity's greatest advantage. Large mammals dominate these ancient landscapes. Straight-tusked elephants roam Europe and Western Asia. Giant deer carry antlers wider than many modern automobiles. Rhinoceroses inhabit regions that today covered by forests or farmland. Massive predators including saber-toothed cats, giant hyenas and powerful bears compete for territory and food. Early humans do not arrive in empty lands waiting to be occupied. They enter ecosystems already shaped by millions of years of evolutionary history. Stone tools accompany them wherever they travel. Archaeological sites across Eurasia reveal familiar Oldowan, and later Acheulean technologies appearing alongside migrating human populations. Hand axes in particular become one of the defining tools of Homo erectus. Carefully shaped on both sides to produce symmetrical cutting edges, these implements remain in use for more than 1 million years. Their remarkable longevity suggests they fulfill a wide range of practical needs remarkably well. The hand axe also reveals growing cognitive sophistication. Producing one requires planning several steps ahead. The maker must visualize the desired final shape before beginning to remove flakes. Mistakes made early in the process may ruin the entire tool. Such craftsmanship indicates increasing mental abilities, patience, and manual precision. Fire may begin playing a more consistent role during this period, although the evidence remains debated. Some archaeological sites suggest controlled use of fire by around 1 million years ago or earlier, while others argue that convincing evidence becomes widespread only hundreds of thousands of years later. If early humans are indeed mastering fire, the implications are profound. Fire provides warmth during cold nights, protection from many predators, light after sunset, and eventually the ability to cook food. Yet because natural wildfires are common across prehistoric landscapes, distinguishing accidental burning from deliberate fire use remains one of archaeology's most difficult challenges. Migration also encourages new forms of adaptation. Populations living thousands of kilometers apart experience different climates, food sources, and ecological pressures. Over hundreds of thousands of years, regional differences begin accumulating. Some groups become physically larger in colder climates, reducing heat loss. Others retain more slender bodies suited for warmer environments. These gradual variations eventually contribute to the remarkable diversity seen among later human species. Perhaps the greatest challenge faced by these early travelers is unpredictability. Rivers flood unexpectedly, droughts eliminate familiar food sources, volcanic eruptions transform entire regions, ice ages advance and retreat repeatedly, altering coastlines, vegetation, and animal migrations. Unlike modern societies, early humans possess no maps, written knowledge, or permanent settlements. Their understanding of the world depends entirely upon memory observation and shared experience passed from one generation to the next. The archaeological record occasionally preserves poignant reminders of this resilience. At Dmanisi, researchers discover the skull of an elderly individual who survives for years despite having lost nearly all of their teeth. Such severe tooth loss would make independent feeding extraordinarily difficult. The individual's long survival suggests companions may have shared food and provided care. If this interpretation is correct, compassion and cooperation are already becoming important survival strategies nearly 2 million years ago. No single migration transforms humanity overnight. Many early dispersals likely end in failure, with small populations disappearing as climates shift or resources become scarce. Others persist for thousands of generations, gradually spreading across enormous distances. The evidence remains incomplete because erosion, changing sea levels, and the simple passage of time have erased countless traces of these journeys. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that the first migration out of Africa is less a triumphant conquest than a slow unfolding of possibility. Each valley crossed, each river followed, and each unfamiliar horizon explored expands the boundaries of the human world a little farther. Without realizing it, these ancient travelers begin a process that will eventually carry their descendants into frozen Arctic landscapes, isolated Pacific islands, towering mountain ranges, and many millennia later, even beyond the atmosphere of Earth itself. The first steps away from humanity's ancient homeland become the beginning of a journey that has never truly ended. For a long time, scientists imagine human evolution as a simple procession. One species replaces another in an orderly sequence, each more advanced than the last, until modern humans finally appear. It is an appealing image because it is easy to understand. Yet every decade of new discoveries pushes that picture further from reality. The ancient world is not inhabited by a single kind of human at any given moment. Instead, it resembles a crowded family reunion spread across continents, with multiple human species living at the same time, adapting to different environments, sometimes sharing landscapes, and occasionally even sharing genes. Humanity's past is not a straight line, but a tangled forest of overlapping branches. Among the most successful of these branches is Homo erectus. Emerging nearly 2 million years ago, this remarkable species survives for well over 1.5 million years, making it one of the longest-lasting human species ever to exist. Compared with earlier members of the human family, Homo erectus possesses a taller body, longer legs and body proportions strikingly similar to those of modern humans. These anatomical changes make long-distance walking and endurance travel increasingly efficient, allowing populations to spread across Africa, Western Asia, Eastern Asia, and parts of Europe. Their brains are considerably larger than those of Australopithecines, though still smaller than those of modern humans. They produce increasingly refined stone tools, adapt to diverse climates, and possibly master the regular use of fire. Few species in evolutionary history demonstrate such extraordinary resilience. For hundreds of thousands of generations, Homo erectus thrives across landscapes ranging from tropical forests to temperate grasslands. Yet they are not alone. In Europe, another lineage gradually develops from earlier human populations. These individuals are often grouped under names such as Homo heidelbergensis, although exactly how different populations should be classified remains a matter of scientific debate. Fossils reveal powerful bodies, expanding brains, and growing evidence of increasingly sophisticated behavior. Many researchers believe these populations eventually give rise to the Neanderthals in Europe, while related African populations contribute to the ancestry of modern humans. The human family tree continues branching. Far to the east, Homo erectus populations survive in Indonesia long after many of their relatives disappear elsewhere. On isolated islands, evolution follows unusual paths. Changing sea levels repeatedly connect and separate islands from the mainland, creating natural laboratories where populations evolve under unique conditions. Isolation becomes one of evolution's most powerful forces. One astonishing example emerges on the Indonesian island of Flores. In 2003, archaeologists uncover fossils belonging to an unexpectedly small human species, now known as Homo floresiensis. Standing only about 1 meter tall, these individuals quickly earn the popular nickname the Hobbits. Their brains are remarkably small, yet stone tools found alongside them demonstrate surprising technological competence. The discovery immediately sparks controversy. Some researchers initially argue that the skeletons represent diseased modern humans rather than a separate species. Years of additional research gradually strengthen the case that Homo floresiensis is indeed a distinct branch of humanity. Exactly where it fits within the evolutionary tree remains uncertain. Some scientists suggest descent from Homo erectus populations that become smaller through island dwarfism. Others propose an even older origin linked to earlier human ancestors. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars continue debating the precise relationships. Another extraordinary discovery arrives from an unexpected source, not bones shaped into complete skeletons, but fragments so small they seem almost insignificant. Deep inside Denisova Cave in Siberia, researchers recover a finger bone, several teeth, and later a handful of additional remains. At first glance, the fossils reveal little. Ancient DNA, however, tells an astonishing story. The genetic sequences belong to an entirely unknown human population now called the Denisovans. Unlike Neanderthals, whose skeletons are relatively abundant, Denisovans remain among the most mysterious members of the human family. Scientists possess only a few physical remains, yet genetics reveals that they spread across enormous parts of Asia. Even more surprising traces of Denisovan DNA survive today, within many modern populations, particularly among indigenous peoples of Oceania and parts of Southeast Asia. Entire human populations once exist almost invisibly within the fossil record, remembered primarily through fragments of genetic inheritance carried by people living today. The discovery changes the way scientists think about human evolution. Missing fossils no longer necessarily mean missing species. Entire branches of humanity may remain hidden because geological conditions fail to preserve their skeletons. Ancient DNA opens a completely new window into the past, revealing relatives whose physical appearance remains largely unknown. Meanwhile, Europe becomes home to one of humanity's best-known cousins, the Neanderthals. For decades, they are portrayed as primitive cave dwellers, ultimately replaced by superior modern humans. That image has steadily collapsed under the weight of new evidence. Neanderthals possess brains as large as and sometimes slightly larger than those of living humans. Their bodies are compact and immensely powerful, well suited to surviving harsh Ice Age winters. They manufacture sophisticated stone tools, hunt dangerous large animals, care for injured companions, and almost certainly communicate through complex spoken language, although its exact form remains uncertain. Archaeological discoveries increasingly suggest emotional depth as well. Individuals with severe injuries survive for years despite disabilities that would make independent living nearly impossible. Such survival implies long-term care from family members or social groups. Pigments, ornaments, and possible symbolic behavior appear at several sites, challenging older assumptions that creativity belongs exclusively to modern humans. Instead of one dominant human species spreading across an empty world, the late Pleistocene resembles a patchwork of neighbouring populations. Some occupy cold northern environments, others flourish in tropical forests or dry savannas. Climatic changes repeatedly expand and contract their territories, bringing different groups into contact before separating them again. Competition undoubtedly occurs. Food resources are limited, hunting territories overlap, climate shifts increase pressure on already vulnerable populations, yet conflict is only one possible outcome. Ancient DNA reveals something even more remarkable. Different human species sometimes have children together. This realization overturns one of the oldest assumptions in anthropology. Evolutionary branches once thought completely separate are at least in some cases capable of interbreeding successfully. The boundaries between species become less rigid than previously imagined. Humanity is not composed of isolated evolutionary experiments, but of populations whose histories occasionally intersect in intimate ways. The ancient world therefore contains far greater diversity than anyone once imagined. Several kinds of humans share the planet simultaneously, each representing millions of years of independent evolution. Some adapt to freezing tundra, others master dense tropical forests or isolated islands. Each develops unique solutions to the challenges of survival, yet none can foresee which branches will endure. What survives in the archaeological and genetic records suggests that being human has never meant belonging to a single form. For much of prehistory, humanity is a mosaic of different faces, different bodies, and different cultures scattered across continents. Modern humans are not the inevitable endpoint standing alone at the summit of evolution. They are simply the last surviving branch of what was once an astonishingly diverse human family, a family whose lost members continue to reshape our understanding every time a new fossil emerges from the earth. Among all the branches of the human family, only one eventually spreads across every continent, builds civilizations, writes history, and begins asking questions about its own origins. That branch is Homo sapiens. Yet the appearance of our own species is not the dramatic beginning it's often imagined to be. There is no single morning when the first modern human awakens beneath an African sky. There is no clear dividing line separating those who come before from those who come after. Instead, modern humanity emerges gradually through countless generations, its defining characteristics accumulating so slowly that no individual could ever recognize the transformation taking place. The oldest fossils widely accepted as belonging to Homo sapiens date to approximately 300,000 years ago. One of the most important discoveries comes from Jebel Irhoud in present-day Morocco. Before these remarkable fossils are unearthed and carefully dated, many researchers believe modern humans originate much later and primarily in eastern Africa. The Moroccan discoveries challenge that picture. The individuals from Jebel Irhoud possess faces that look surprisingly familiar. Their features are flatter and more delicate than those of earlier human species. The jaws are smaller, and the teeth resemble those of people living today. Yet other parts of the skull remain noticeably different. The brain case is longer and lower than in modern humans, suggesting that although brain size has reached nearly modern proportions, its internal organization may still be evolving. This combination of ancient and modern traits reveals an important lesson. Evolution does not redesign the body all at once. Different anatomical features change at different rates. Faces become modern before skull shapes do. Bodies continue adapting while brains reorganize internally. The process resembles countless overlapping streams rather than one dramatic transformation. Additional discoveries strengthen this emerging picture. Fossils from Omo Kibish and Herto in Ethiopia reveal other early populations displaying recognizably modern anatomy. Together, these finds suggest that Homo sapiens does not originate within a single isolated valley or one small region. Instead, many researchers now support what is sometimes called a Pan-African model. According to this view, populations spread across different parts of Africa remain connected through occasional migration and interbreeding over immense periods of time. Beneficial genetic changes spread gradually between regions rather than remaining confined to one isolated population. Humanity's origin therefore reflects a continent-wide evolutionary network instead of a single birthplace. The evidence remains incomplete and scholars continue debating the details. Fossils remain scarce, particularly from Central and Western Africa, where dense forests and humid conditions make preservation difficult. Entire populations may have lived and disappeared without leaving recoverable remains. Every new discovery, therefore, has the potential to reshape scientific understanding. Anatomically, early Homo sapiens differ from earlier human relatives in several important ways. Their skeletons become generally lighter and more slender. Brow ridges shrink. Chins become more prominent, a uniquely human characteristic, whose precise evolutionary purpose remains uncertain. The pelvis rib cage and limbs reflect bodies increasingly adapted for endurance and flexibility rather than sheer physical power. Yet anatomy alone does not explain the extraordinary future of our species. Behavior may ultimately prove even more important. Archaeological evidence begins revealing increasingly sophisticated ways of interacting with the environment. Stone tools become more specialized. Rather than relying upon a single multi-purpose implement, toolmakers begin producing distinct forms designed for different tasks. Carefully prepared stone cores allow predictable flakes to be removed with remarkable efficiency. Wooden tools, although rarely preserved, likely become increasingly common as well. Diet grows more varied than ever before. Early Homo sapiens exploit coastlines, rivers, forests, grasslands, and deserts with remarkable adaptability. Fish, shellfish, birds, mammals, edible plants, seeds, and underground tubers all contribute to survival. This flexibility reduces dependence upon any single resource and allows populations to thrive across environments that challenge many earlier human species. One particularly revealing clue comes from sites along ancient African coastlines. Archaeologists discover shell-midden accumulations of discarded shellfish, remains dating back well over 100,000 years. Collecting shellfish requires knowledge of tides, seasonal patterns, and coastal ecology. These rich food sources may help sustain growing populations while encouraging increasingly permanent use of coastal environments. Planning also becomes more sophisticated. Some archaeological sites reveal evidence that stone suitable for toolmaking is transported over dozens of kilometers. Pigments such as red ochre are collected and carried even when they possess no obvious nutritional value. Although scholars continue debating exactly how pigments are used, many suspect they play roles in body decoration, hide preparation, or symbolic behavior. Whatever their purpose, they suggest that human thinking is extending beyond immediate survival. Social organization likely grows more complex as well. Larger networks of cooperation allow information to spread across broader regions. Groups encountering environmental disasters may seek assistance from distant relatives or neighboring communities. Such social flexibility becomes an important advantage during periods of climatic instability. Climate continues shaping every aspect of existence. Around 300,000 years ago, Africa experiences repeated cycles of changing rainfall. Lakes expand dramatically during wetter periods, before shrinking or disappearing during prolonged droughts. Grasslands replace forests only to yield once again when conditions improve. Populations become repeatedly isolated and reconnected as favourable habitats shift across the continent. Many researchers believe these environmental fluctuations encourage innovation. Communities capable of adapting quickly survive changing conditions more successfully than those dependent upon narrow ecological niches. The result is not merely biological evolution, but increasing behavioural versatility. The human brain may not simply become larger during this period, it may become differently organised. Although fossil skulls cannot directly preserve thoughts, endocasts, the internal impressions of the brain case, suggest subtle changes in the regions associated with higher cognitive functions. Combined with growing archaeological evidence of planning technological refinement and symbolic activity, these anatomical clues hint at increasingly sophisticated mental abilities. Still, caution remains essential. It is tempting to imagine early Homo sapiens as fully modern people transported into an ancient landscape. In reality, they live under conditions profoundly different from anything familiar today. Infant mortality is high. Food availability changes constantly. Predators remain formidable. Disease, injury, and climatic shifts shape daily existence in ways almost impossible for modern societies to imagine. Even so, certain qualities begin distinguishing these populations from many earlier human relatives. They display extraordinary ecological flexibility. Instead of specializing narrowly, they repeatedly adapt to new environments. Instead of depending upon one technology, they continuously refine old ideas and develop new ones. Instead of remaining confined to familiar territories, they gradually expand into landscapes that earlier generations had never seen. None of these developments guarantees eventual success. At this point in history, Homo sapiens is simply one human species among several. Neanderthals thrive in Europe and Western Asia. Denisovans occupy large regions farther east. Other human populations almost certainly remain undiscovered. From the perspective of 300,000 years ago, there is nothing inevitable about the future dominance of our species. What survives in the fossil and archaeological record suggests only that something subtle is beginning to change. Across Africa, scattered populations carrying recognizably modern bodies are slowly developing new ways of understanding their world. Their tools become more refined, their movements more ambitious, and their social connections more extensive. They do not yet know that their descendants will someday cross every ocean, explore every continent, and uncover the very fossils that tell this ancient story. For now they remain simply another branch of humanity, taking its first uncertain steps into a future still hidden beyond the horizon. For tens of thousands of years the Earth is home to more than one kind of human. Modern humans are not alone. Across Europe, Western Asia, Central Asia, and parts of the Middle East, other human species continue living according to traditions shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of independent evolution. Rivers, mountain ranges, forests, and open plains separate these populations for long periods before changing climates occasionally bring them together once again. When they finally meet, the encounters are far more complex than earlier generations of scientists ever imagined. The best known of these relatives are the Neanderthals. For more than a century after their discovery, they are portrayed as clumsy, unintelligent, and ultimately doomed competitors, incapable of matching the abilities of modern humans. Popular illustrations exaggerate their primitive appearance, depicting stooped figures dragging crude clubs through frozen landscapes. Almost every part of that image has now been abandoned. Modern research reveals a remarkably capable human population perfectly adapted to Ice Age Europe. Neanderthals possess broad chests, powerful shoulders, thick limb bones, and compact bodies that conserve heat during long, bitter winters. Their large noses may help warm and humidify freezing air before it reaches the lungs. Their muscles are exceptionally strong, allowing them to hunt massive animals including bison, horses, reindeer, and occasionally mammoths. Living in environments where temperatures frequently fall well below freezing demands extraordinary resilience. Archaeological discoveries reveal equally impressive intelligence. Their stone tools become increasingly sophisticated over time. They manufacture carefully shaped spear points, scrapers' knives, and woodworking implements. They understand how to select appropriate raw materials and often transport high-quality stone over considerable distances. At some sites, they use naturally occurring adhesives produced by heating birch bark in low-oxygen conditions, a surprisingly complex technological process requiring careful control of fire. Neanderthals also demonstrate remarkable knowledge of their environments. Seasonal migrations of animals are anticipated. Suitable hunting locations are revisited generation after generation. Caves provide shelter during harsh weather, while open camps appear during favourable seasons. Their survival reflects accumulated knowledge passed through countless generations. Perhaps most moving is the evidence for compassion. Several Neanderthal skeletons preserve severe injuries that would have prevented independent survival. Broken limbs heal successfully. Individuals missing arms, damaged eyes, or suffering from degenerative disease continue living for many years after their injuries occur. Such survival strongly suggests long-term care by companions willing to share food, provide protection, and assist vulnerable members of the group. These discoveries challenge simplistic ideas about what separates modern humans from earlier relatives. Empathy, cooperation, and social responsibility are not uniquely modern traits. Around 60 to 70,000 years ago, populations of Homo sapiens begin expanding beyond Africa in larger numbers than before. They move gradually through the Arabian Peninsula into Western Asia, where Neanderthals have already lived for hundreds of thousands of years. Eventually, the two human species occupy many of the same landscapes. For decades, archaeologists debate the nature of these encounters. Do they fight? Do they avoid one another? Do they exchange knowledge? Do they simply replace one another over time? Ancient DNA eventually provides one of the most surprising answers. Nearly every person living outside sub-Saharan Africa today carries approximately 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. This genetic inheritance could exist only if members of both populations have children together. The realization fundamentally changes scientific understanding. The meeting between modern humans and Neanderthals is not simply one of competition. It also includes cooperation, intimacy, and family. Exactly how frequently such interbreeding occurs remains uncertain. It is probably uncommon rather than routine. Yet even occasional exchanges leave lasting genetic signatures that survive tens of thousands of years later. These inherited genes are not merely historical curiosities. Some influence immune responses that help modern humans resist unfamiliar diseases encountered outside Africa. Others affect skin characteristics, hair metabolism, or sensitivity to sunlight. Certain Neanderthal genes are associated with increased risk of particular modern illnesses, while others appear beneficial under specific environmental conditions. In a very real sense, Neanderthals have never disappeared completely. Small parts of their biological legacy continue living within billions of people today. The story becomes even more remarkable with the Denisovans. Although their fossils remain extremely scarce, genetic evidence demonstrates that they also interbreed with modern humans. Populations in Papua New Guinea, Australia, and parts of Southeast Asia carry significant amounts of Denisovan DNA. Some Tibetan populations inherit Denisovan genetic variants that improve survival at high altitudes by helping the body function efficiently in thin mountain air. Ancient encounters therefore continue influencing human biology thousands of generations later. Instead of replacing every earlier population completely, Homo sapiens sometimes absorb portions of their genetic heritage. Yet coexistence is not peaceful everywhere. Resources remain limited. Climate changes repeatedly reshape habitats. Ice sheets advance and retreat. Animal populations migrate. Competition for food territory and shelter inevitably occurs. Archaeological evidence occasionally reveals overlapping occupations of caves and hunting grounds. In some regions, modern humans appear shortly before Neanderthal populations disappear. Whether this reflects direct conflict, gradual competition, environmental stress, disease, or some combination of factors remains one of prehistory's greatest unanswered questions. No single explanation fully accounts for the Neanderthal extinction. Climate undoubtedly plays a role. Europe during the final ice age experiences dramatic environmental instability. Forests shrink, grasslands expand, animal migrations shift unpredictably. Small isolated populations become increasingly vulnerable. Modern humans may possess certain advantages as well. Larger social networks allow information to spread over wider geographic areas. Trade or exchange between distant groups becomes increasingly common. More extensive communication means useful innovations can travel rapidly, rather than remaining confined to one local population. Population size itself may also matter. Even modest differences in birth rates or survival accumulate across thousands of years. Larger interconnected populations recover more easily after local disasters than smaller isolated communities. Disease may contribute too. Whenever previously separated populations meet, unfamiliar pathogens can spread with devastating consequences. Direct evidence for prehistoric epidemics remains limited, but many researchers consider disease a plausible factor among several interacting pressures. What becomes increasingly clear is that Neanderthals do not suddenly vanish. Their disappearance unfolds gradually across thousands of years. Some populations retreat into isolated regions, others interbreed with expanding Homo sapiens. Eventually, distinct Neanderthal communities cease to exist, but their story continues through the descendants who inherit fragments of their DNA. The same broad pattern likely applies to other human species. Some disappear without leaving identifiable descendants. Others contribute genetically to later populations. Many remain almost entirely unknown because erosion rising seas volcanic activity and simple chance erase nearly every physical trace they leave behind. The ancient world is therefore far more interconnected than once believed. Different kinds of humans encounter one another repeatedly. They compete. They cooperate. They exchange genes. They influence each other's technologies and perhaps even their cultures. What survives in the archaeological and genetic record suggests that humanity's past is not a story of one superior species marching inevitably toward dominance. It is instead the story of an extended family whose members share landscapes, adapt to changing climates, and sometimes become part of one another in unexpected ways. The first humans are not isolated chapters separated by clean endings. They are overlapping lives connected through ancestry survival and memory, leaving traces that still exist within every modern genome long after the last Neanderthal footprints disappear from the frozen soils of Ice Age Europe. For most of the 20th century, archaeologists rely primarily on bone stone tools and the geological layers surrounding them to reconstruct humanity's earliest history. Every discovery adds another fragment to the puzzle, but enormous gaps remain. Fossils are rare. Entire regions preserve almost nothing. Ancient populations may vanish without leaving a single skeleton behind. Then, near the end of the century, an entirely new source of evidence begins transforming the field. Hidden inside ancient bones lies another archive, one far smaller than any fossil, yet capable of revealing stories no skeleton alone could ever tell. That archive is DNA. Recovering genetic material from prehistoric remains initially seems almost impossible. DNA is an extraordinarily fragile molecule. Heat, moisture, bacteria, and time gradually break it apart into tiny fragments. After tens of thousands of years, most genetic material has disappeared completely. For decades, researchers assume that meaningful ancient DNA simply cannot survive long enough to be useful. A handful of pioneering scientists refuse to accept that conclusion, working under extraordinarily clean laboratory conditions to avoid contamination from modern human DNA. They begin extracting tiny genetic fragments from exceptionally well-preserved fossils found in cold caves and permanently frozen environments. Progress is slow. Early techniques recover only short sequences containing limited information. Even so, the results hint at extraordinary possibilities. As sequencing technology improves during the early 21st century, ancient DNA research undergoes a revolution. Entire genomes become recoverable. Instead of studying isolated genetic markers, researchers can compare nearly complete genetic blueprints from individuals who lived tens of thousands of years ago. Suddenly, questions that once seemed impossible begin receiving surprisingly detailed answers. One of the first great breakthroughs confirms something that had been debated for decades. Neanderthals are not distant evolutionary curiosities unrelated to living people. They are close relatives. The comparison of Neanderthal genomes with those of modern populations reveals unmistakable evidence of interbreeding. People living today outside sub-Saharan Africa inherit approximately 1 to 2% of their DNA from Neanderthal ancestors. This inheritance is not symbolic or theoretical. It is physically present inside living cells throughout much of the world. Every modern genome becomes a historical document. Instead of reading only bones buried in caves, scientists begin reading traces carried silently within billions of living people. The surprises do not end there. In Denisova Cave, located in the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia, archaeologists recover an astonishingly small fossil, a finger bone belonging to a young girl who dies roughly 50,000 years ago. The fragment is so modest that without genetic analysis it would attract relatively little attention. DNA transforms it into one of the most important fossils ever discovered. The girl's genetic sequence belongs neither to a Neanderthal nor to a modern human. She represents an entirely distinct population previously unknown to science. The Denisovans enter the human story not through dramatic skeletons, but through invisible molecules preserved inside ancient bone. Further discoveries deepen the mystery. Scientists recover DNA from a jawbone found on the Tibetan plateau. Additional fragments emerge from caves in Laos. Modern populations across Oceania, Southeast Asia, and parts of East Asia carry Denisovan ancestry despite the scarcity of Denisovan fossils themselves. This remarkable mismatch between fossils and genetics teaches archaeologists an important lesson. The fossil record dramatically underestimates ancient human diversity. Entire populations may exist for hundreds of thousands of years, while leaving almost no skeletal remains for future discovery. Genes preserve histories that bones alone cannot. Ancient DNA also reveals extraordinary individual stories. One of the most famous discoveries comes from another fossil recovered inside Denisova Cave. At first, researchers simply classify it as another fragment awaiting analysis. Genetic sequencing produces an astonishing result. The individual nicknamed Denny has a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. She is a first-generation hybrid. This single discovery proves beyond doubt that different human populations sometimes have children together. Interbreeding is not merely a rare theoretical possibility. It happens often enough to leave identifiable descendants. Perhaps even more remarkable, Denny's Denisovan father already possesses traces of Neanderthal ancestry inherited from earlier generations. These populations encounter one another repeatedly over thousands of years. Human evolution increasingly resembles a braided river whose channels separate and reconnect rather than isolated streams flowing independently. Ancient DNA also reconstructs migrations impossible to observe archaeologically. Researchers trace how farming populations spread into Europe. They identify waves of movement across Central Asia. They discover that many prehistoric societies are far more mobile than once believed. Communities previously assumed to remain isolated actually exchange genes across astonishing distances. Some migrations unfold gradually over centuries, others occur with surprising speed. The genetic record often reveals movement long before archaeology alone detects it. Disease history emerges as well. Ancient DNA identifies pathogens preserved within prehistoric skeletons, including early strains of plague and tuberculosis. Researchers begin tracing how infectious diseases spread alongside migrating populations. These findings reveal that the relationship between humans and disease stretches far deeper into prehistory than previously imagined. Diet also leaves genetic fingerprints. As different populations adapt to local environments, natural selection favors genes suited to regional conditions. Some groups evolve the ability to digest milk during adulthood after domestication of livestock. Others develop adaptations to Arctic diets rich in marine mammals. High-altitude populations inherit genetic changes allowing survival where oxygen levels remain dangerously low. These evolutionary adjustments occur surprisingly recently, demonstrating that human evolution continues long after the appearance of modern anatomy. Not every mystery disappears with genetic research. DNA survives only under favorable conditions. Warm tropical climates rapidly destroy ancient genetic material. As a result, Africa, the birthplace of humanity, often preserves far less recoverable DNA than colder northern regions. This imbalance creates an important challenge. The continent containing the deepest chapters of human evolution remains among the most genetically difficult to investigate using ancient remains. Fortunately, improvements in extraction techniques continue expanding what is possible. Researchers increasingly recover DNA from sediments rather than bones alone. Tiny genetic fragments shed through skin cells, hair, bodily fluids, or decaying tissue accumulate within cave soils. Even where no skeleton survives, traces of ancient populations sometimes remain hidden beneath the ground itself. The archaeological record is no longer limited to visible fossils. Entire invisible archives wait inside sediments. Perhaps the greatest lesson provided by genetics is humility. Time after time, assumptions regarded as secure collapse beneath new evidence. Populations once believed completely isolated prove surprisingly connected. Species once considered entirely separate exchange genes. Migration routes once imagined as straightforward become tangled networks of repeated movement. Every major breakthrough answers one question while raising several new ones. Scholars still debate many details. Exactly how many distinct human populations exist during the late Pleistocene? How often do they interact? How many remain undiscovered? Could additional human lineages survive in regions where neither fossils nor DNA have yet been recovered? The evidence remains incomplete. Yet one conclusion has become increasingly difficult to ignore. Modern humanity is not the product of a single isolated lineage marching alone through time. Instead, our ancestry resembles an immense woven tapestry, created from countless threads crossing and reconnecting over hundreds of thousands of years. Every person alive today carries a genetic record extending back through those ancient encounters. Inside every human cell survives a microscopic reminder that our ancestors do not simply replace one another. They meet, they mix, they adapt. They leave behind fragments of themselves in generations they will never know. The mystery of the first humans therefore becomes not only a story buried beneath ancient sediments, but one carried quietly within every living person, written in a language older than any spoken word, and preserved through the endless continuity of life itself. For countless generations, survival depends upon finding food, avoiding predators, raising children, and enduring an unpredictable climate. These practical concerns dominate daily existence, yet at some point during humanity's long journey, another layer of behavior begins emerging, one that is far more difficult to recognize in the archaeological record. Early humans start creating objects that seem to possess meaning beyond immediate survival. They decorate their bodies, collect unusual materials, engrave patterns into stone and bone, and eventually paint images deep inside caves where no ordinary activity takes place. These discoveries raise one of the deepest questions in the study of human origins. When do humans begin thinking symbolically? Unlike bones or stone tools, thoughts do not fossilize. Language disappears the moment the last speaker falls silent. Songs leave no trace. Stories vanish unless someone remembers them. Beliefs about life, death, family, or the stars rarely survive tens of thousands of years. Archaeologists therefore search for indirect evidence objects that appear unnecessary from a purely practical perspective, yet suggest communication through symbols, shared traditions, or abstract ideas. One of the earliest clues comes from pieces of red ochre discovered at several African archaeological sites dating back well over 100,000 years. Ochre is a naturally occurring iron-rich mineral capable of producing vivid red pigment when ground into powder. Some pieces show unmistakable scraping marks created by repeated use. Others display deliberate engraving in the form of geometric lines. Exactly how these pigments are used remains uncertain. Perhaps they decorate bodies during ceremonies. Perhaps they preserve animal hides. Perhaps they mark social identity or group membership. No single explanation fully accounts for every discovery. Yet the repeated collection, transportation, and modification of ochre strongly suggest that early humans value it for reasons extending beyond simple survival. Another remarkable site lies at Blombos Cave on the southern coast of Africa. Archaeologists uncover engraved pieces of ochre, displaying carefully arranged cross-hatched designs, approximately 75,000 years old. The lines are neither random scratches nor accidental damage. Someone intentionally creates repeating geometric patterns whose practical purpose remains unclear. The engravings may appear simple to modern eyes, but they reveal something profound. They represent deliberate abstraction. The maker is no longer responding only to immediate physical needs, but producing patterns carrying some kind of meaning, whether personal, social, or symbolic. Shell beads provide another fascinating clue. Tiny marine shells with carefully drilled holes appear at archaeological sites across Africa and the Middle East. Many show wear consistent with being strung together and worn repeatedly. Similar ornaments emerge independently in different regions separated by considerable distances. Jewelry may seem like a modest invention compared with agriculture or metallurgy, yet it reflects remarkably complex thinking. An ornament communicates information. It may signal identity, family relationships, age, achievement, social status, or membership within a particular community. Unlike stone tools which perform obvious physical functions, beads operate through shared understanding between individuals. Symbols exist only because people collectively agree that they carry meaning. This ability to create shared symbolic systems becomes one of humanity's defining characteristics. Language almost certainly evolves alongside these developments, although direct evidence remains elusive. The anatomy necessary for complex speech develops gradually. The hyoid bone located within the throat resembles that of modern humans in Neanderthals and later members of Homo sapiens. Genetic studies reveal that Neanderthals possess versions of important speech-related genes similar to our own. These clues suggest that language in some form may have deeper evolutionary roots than once believed. Still, scholars continue debating exactly when fully modern language appears. Words themselves disappear into silence. Only their consequences remain. Cooperation on increasingly ambitious projects offers indirect evidence. Large hunting expeditions require planning. Long-distance exchange networks demand communication between distant communities. Knowledge about seasonal migrations, edible plants, dangerous animals, and tool-making techniques must be transmitted accurately across generations. Without increasingly sophisticated language, maintaining such complex cultural traditions would become extraordinarily difficult. Art eventually emerges with astonishing power. Deep inside caves across Europe, prehistoric artists create images that continue inspiring awe tens of thousands of years later. At sites such as Chauvet-Lascaux and Altamira, horses, bison, rhinoceroses, lions, mammoths, and countless other animals appear in remarkable detail. Many paintings exploit natural curves within cave walls to create an illusion of movement. Artists understand perspective shading and composition long before formal artistic theory exists. Some images overlap, suggesting generations return repeatedly to the same sacred spaces. The purpose of these paintings remains one of archaeology's enduring mysteries. Were they connected to hunting rituals, religious beliefs, teaching younger generations, storytelling, community gatherings, private spiritual experiences? The evidence remains incomplete. No written explanation accompanies the paintings. They remain silent masterpieces whose original meanings disappear with their creators. Hand stencils provide perhaps the most intimate connection of all. Throughout caves in Europe, Indonesia, Australia, and elsewhere, ancient individuals press their hands against rock surfaces before blowing pigment around them, leaving negative impressions behind. Thousands of years later, these silhouettes preserve the exact size and proportions of real human hands. Some belong to adults, others to adolescents. A few are likely made by women challenging older assumptions that prehistoric art is created exclusively by men. Each stencil captures a brief moment when one individual reaches across time without ever knowing it. Musical instruments also appear surprisingly early. Flutes carved from bird bones and mammoth ivory date back more than 40,000 years. Music leaves no archaeological echo once the final note fades, yet these instruments demonstrate that rhythm and melody already occupy an important place in human societies. Songs may strengthen group identity, accompany ceremonies, soothe children, coordinate labor, or simply provide enjoyment after long days of survival. Another revealing practice concerns burial. Earlier human species occasionally appear to treat the dead with unusual care, but by the time modern humans become widespread, evidence for deliberate burial grows increasingly common. Some graves contain ornaments, others include tools, pigments, or animal remains. Whether these objects represent beliefs about an afterlife, expressions of grief, or acts of remembrance remains uncertain. What seems increasingly clear is that death itself acquires deeper social meaning. Communities remember individuals even after life ends. Memory begins extending beyond the living. These developments transform human evolution in subtle but extraordinary ways. Biological inheritance remains essential, but cultural inheritance becomes equally important. Knowledge, beliefs, artistic traditions, technologies, and social customs accumulate across generations far more rapidly than genes alone can change. Each generation no longer starts from the beginning. Instead, it builds upon the experiences of those who come before. Culture becomes humanity's second inheritance. Perhaps this is the greatest innovation of all. Stone tools improve because previous generations teach their construction. Art flourishes because traditions endure. Language expands because children learn from countless speakers before them. The accumulated wisdom of communities gradually outweighs the experience of any single individual. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that somewhere during these immense stretches of prehistory, humans become creatures capable not only of surviving within the natural world, but of imagining realities beyond immediate experience. They create symbols, they preserve memories, they communicate ideas that exist only inside the mind. They transform landscapes into places of meaning rather than mere geography. Although the evidence remains fragmentary, these scattered pigments, engraved stones, shell beads, cave paintings, and silent musical instruments reveal that the first humans are becoming something profoundly new, not simply clever animals, not merely skilled toolmakers, but storytellers, artists, thinkers, and creators of invisible worlds carried from one generation to the next, worlds that continue shaping humanity long after the makers themselves have vanished into the deep silence of time. For all that science has uncovered about humanity's earliest past, the greatest surprise may be how much remains hidden. Every fossil displayed in a museum, every reconstructed face, and every carefully dated archaeological site creates the impression of a steadily expanding body of knowledge. Yet behind every celebrated discovery lies an even larger absence. Most ancient landscapes have yielded no human fossils at all. Entire populations may have lived, migrated, adapted, and disappeared without leaving a single recoverable skeleton. The deeper researchers explore humanity's beginnings, the more clearly they recognize that the record itself is incomplete. Fossilization is an extraordinarily rare event. The vast majority of living organisms leave no lasting trace after death. Scavengers scatter bones. Bacteria consume soft tissue. Rain rivers and wind gradually destroy what remains. Even when bones become buried, changing geological conditions may crush them beyond recognition, or dissolve them entirely over millions of years. To become a fossil requires an unlikely chain of favourable circumstances. The body must be buried relatively quickly. Sediment must protect it from scavengers. Chemical conditions must slow decay. The surrounding geology must remain stable for immense periods before erosion finally exposes the remains, at precisely the right moment for someone to discover them. The odds are astonishingly small. Every fossil recovered today therefore represents not a typical individual but an extraordinary accident of preservation. This reality has profound consequences. Imagine an ancient population numbering thousands of individuals across several 100,000 years. Perhaps only one skeleton survives the countless destructive forces acting upon the landscape. Perhaps none survive. Future scientists attempting to reconstruct that population must work with almost nothing. The apparent absence of evidence may simply reflect the impossibility of preservation rather than the true absence of ancient people. Africa, despite being humanity's birthplace, illustrates this challenge particularly well. Dense tropical forests dominate large portions of Central and Western Africa. Warm temperatures, acidic soils, heavy rainfall, and abundant microorganisms rapidly destroy bone. Many regions likely preserve little fossil evidence, even if substantial human populations once thrived there. The archaeological map therefore reflects geological opportunity as much as prehistoric reality. Some places preserve history exceptionally well, others erase it almost completely. Rising sea levels create another enormous obstacle. During the ice ages, vast quantities of water become locked inside continental ice sheets. Global sea levels fall by more than 100 meters, exposing enormous coastal plains where countless generations of humans likely live. As glaciers melt, those landscapes disappear beneath the ocean. Ancient campsites, hunting grounds, river mouths, and migration routes vanish beneath modern seas. Today, archaeologists possess only limited access to these drowned worlds. Advanced underwater surveys continue revealing hints of submerged prehistoric landscapes, yet most remain unexplored. Some of humanity's most important chapters may now lie beneath hundreds of meters of seawater. Volcanoes preserve and destroy simultaneously. Ash occasionally protects footprints and campsites beneath fine layers of sediment. At other times, eruptions bury entire valleys beneath thick lava flows impossible to excavate. Earthquakes reshape river systems. Glaciers grind landscapes into dust. Deserts migrate across once fertile plains. Nature continually rewrites the archaeological record. Even when fossils survive, interpreting them presents another challenge. Species boundaries remain remarkably difficult to define. Modern biology often distinguishes species according to whether populations can produce fertile offspring. Yet ancient humans repeatedly complicate this definition. Neanderthals and modern humans interbreed. Denisovans and modern humans interbreed. Neanderthals and Denisovans interbreed. Some populations appear anatomically distinct while remaining genetically compatible. Others differ only subtly despite hundreds of thousands of years of independent evolution. Scholars continue debating whether certain fossils represent entirely separate species regional variations or simply normal diversity within larger populations. Classification itself remains a moving target. A jawbone discovered today may create new species. 10 years later, additional fossils may demonstrate that it belongs to an already known population. Scientific understanding evolves continuously alongside new evidence. Dating ancient discoveries introduces further complexity. Modern methods, including radiometric dating, paleomagnetism, uranium series analysis, electron spin resonance, and luminescence dating, have dramatically improved chronological accuracy. Even so, every technique carries limitations. Small uncertainties may amount to thousands or even tens of thousands of years. For events unfolding across millions of years, these margins often remain acceptable. For understanding interactions between closely related human populations, however, even relatively small dating uncertainties can become critically important. Did one population disappear before another arrived? Or did they coexist for centuries? Sometimes the answer depends upon differences smaller than the uncertainties themselves. Technological advances continue reshaping these questions. High-resolution CT scanning reveals internal structures hidden within fragile fossils without damaging them. Three-dimensional digital reconstructions allow researchers worldwide to study rare specimens simultaneously. Artificial intelligence increasingly assists in identifying subtle anatomical patterns invisible to the human eye. Sedimentary DNA reveals populations even where no bones survive. Proteomics, the study of ancient proteins, offers another promising avenue when DNA has completely degraded. Every new technique opens previously inaccessible windows into prehistory. Yet each breakthrough also uncovers fresh mysteries. One remarkable example emerges from the discovery of Homo naledi in South Africa. Hundreds of fossil remains belonging to at least 15 individuals are found deep within the Rising Star cave system. The species possesses an unusual combination of primitive and surprisingly modern features. Its brain remains relatively small, yet some aspects of its anatomy resemble much later humans. Even more puzzling is the location itself. The fossils lie deep inside chambers difficult to reach even with modern equipment. Some researchers suggest deliberate placement of the dead. Others argue that natural processes better explain the accumulation. Scholars still debate the evidence vigorously. No single explanation fully accounts for every observation. The discovery reminds everyone how unpredictable human evolution can be. Another mystery concerns ghost populations. Genetic analyses occasionally detect traces of ancient lineages for which no fossil evidence currently exists. These invisible ancestors leave genetic signatures without leaving identifiable skeletons. Their physical appearance remains unknown. Their cultures remain unknown. Even their geographical ranges remain uncertain. They are remembered only through faint echoes preserved inside later genomes. Perhaps dozens of such populations once exist, perhaps even more. Future discoveries may dramatically expand the known human family tree, or they may overturn relationships once considered secure. The history of paleoanthropology repeatedly demonstrates that certainty rarely lasts long. Nearly every generation of researchers inherits conclusions later revised by new evidence. This is not a weakness of science. It is one of its greatest strengths. Scientific understanding improves precisely because it remains willing to change. Every fossil challenges previous assumptions. Every excavation raises new questions. Every laboratory technique uncovers information once thought permanently lost. The mystery of the first humans therefore persists not because researchers have failed, but because the evidence itself remains astonishingly incomplete. Humanity's earliest history resembles an ancient manuscript damaged by fire, water, and time. Only scattered pages survive. Some sentences remain perfectly clear, others end abruptly. Entire chapters are missing. Yet with patience, careful investigation, and continual discovery, those fragments slowly begin forming a story. It is still unfinished. Perhaps it always will be. But every new clue recovered from beneath deserts, caves, riverbanks, and ocean floors reminds us that the greatest discoveries may still be waiting beneath landscapes where no one has yet thought to look. The deeper scientists investigate humanity's beginnings, the more they discover that no single explanation can fully account for our origins. Every major discovery strengthens certain ideas while weakening others. Fossils reveal anatomy, but not thoughts. Stone tools illuminate behavior, but not language. DNA uncovers family relationships while remaining silent about culture. Climate records explain environmental pressures without revealing how individual communities respond to them. The story of the first humans therefore emerges from the careful blending of many different kinds of evidence, each offering only part of a much larger picture. One of the oldest and most influential scientific ideas is often called the recent African origin model. According to this framework, Homo sapiens evolves within Africa before expanding into the rest of the world approximately 60 to 70,000 years ago. As these expanding populations spread across Eurasia, they encounter other human groups including Neanderthals and Denisovans, eventually becoming the only surviving human species. For many years, this model is presented almost as a complete replacement scenario. Earlier human populations outside Africa are believed to disappear entirely as modern humans expand. Ancient DNA significantly reshapes that interpretation. Instead of complete replacement, the evidence reveals limited but important interbreeding between populations. Modern humans inherit genetic material from Neanderthals, Denisovans, and possibly additional unknown human groups. The basic African origin remains strongly supported by genetic, fossil, and archaeological evidence, but the process proves more interconnected than originally imagined. This revised understanding is often described as the assimilation model. Under this view, modern humans still originate primarily in Africa, yet as they expand across Eurasia, they absorb small portions of the genetic heritage carried by other human populations. The result is neither total replacement nor complete merging, but something between the two. Genetic evidence strongly supports this interpretation. Even so, researchers continue debating the extent of these interactions. Exactly how frequently do different human populations meet? How much cultural knowledge do they exchange? Do technologies spread through direct contact or independent invention? The evidence remains incomplete. Another influential perspective focuses less upon migration and more upon population structure within Africa itself. Known as the Pan-African model, this approach argues that modern humans do not emerge from one isolated birthplace occupied by a small founding population. Instead, multiple interconnected populations distributed across different African regions evolved together over hundreds of thousands of years. Changing climates repeatedly isolate communities before reconnecting them through migration. Useful genetic variations spread gradually across the continent. Modern humanity therefore develops through a continent-wide network rather than a single geographic center. Recent fossil discoveries lend increasing support to aspects of this idea. Early Homo sapiens fossils appear in Morocco, Ethiopia, South Africa, and other widely separated regions. Rather than pointing toward one precise location, these discoveries suggest a broader evolutionary landscape involving many populations exchanging genes across enormous distances. Climate remains central to nearly every explanation. For millions of years, Africa experiences dramatic environmental fluctuations driven by subtle changes in Earth's orbit around the Sun. These orbital cycles alter rainfall patterns, causing lakes to expand and contract repeatedly. Grasslands replace forests. Forests later reclaim former grasslands. Deserts advance before retreating once again. Each environmental transition reshapes the habitats available to both humans and animals. Many anthropologists argue that these constantly changing conditions favor behavioral flexibility above all else. Populations capable of adapting quickly survive shifting environments more successfully than highly specialized competitors. Over immense periods, adaptability itself becomes humanity's defining evolutionary advantage. Some researchers describe this as the variability selection hypothesis. Rather than selecting for one particular adaptation, unpredictable climates reward individuals capable of adjusting to many different situations. This perspective helps explain why humans eventually thrive in deserts, tropical forests, mountain ranges, Arctic tundra, and coastal environments despite possessing relatively modest physical specialization compared with many other mammals. Another enduring debate concerns intelligence. Why does the human brain become so large? Several competing explanations remain under discussion. The social brain hypothesis emphasizes increasingly complex relationships within expanding communities. Managing friendships, family ties, alliances, and rivalries requires sophisticated cognitive abilities. The ecological intelligence hypothesis instead highlights challenges posed by finding food, remembering seasonal resources, and navigating unpredictable landscapes. Other researchers stress technological innovation or dietary improvements. Most likely, several factors interact simultaneously rather than acting independently. Evolution rarely favors one simple cause. Language remains perhaps the greatest unresolved mystery. Every known human society possesses language, yet words leave no fossil record. Scientists therefore rely upon indirect evidence, the anatomy of the vocal tract, brain organization, genetic studies, symbolic artifacts, patterns of cooperation. No single discovery identifies the precise moment when language becomes fully modern. Some scholars argue that language develops gradually over hundreds of thousands of years. Others propose more rapid changes linked to neurological evolution. The evidence supports neither absolute certainty nor complete speculation. Instead, it points toward a long, complex process whose earlier stages remain largely invisible. Fire presents another example of scientific uncertainty. Natural wildfires have always shaped prehistoric landscapes. Determining when humans first learned to control fire intentionally is surprisingly difficult. Burned bones alone prove little. Lightning may ignite vegetation. Volcanoes create natural fires. Researchers therefore search for repeated evidence of controlled hearths, burned tools, cooked food remains, and fire use within caves. Different sites produce different interpretations. Some suggest controlled fire nearly 1.5 million years ago. Others argue convincing widespread evidence appears much later. Scholars continue evaluating each discovery carefully. One particularly fascinating debate concerns consciousness itself. At what point do early humans begin thinking in recognizably modern ways? Did symbolic thought emerge gradually alongside increasing brain complexity? Or did cognitive abilities suddenly reorganize into something fundamentally different? Archaeological discoveries provide intriguing clues but no final answer. Engraved ochre, shell beads, burials, cave paintings, musical instruments, each hints at abstract thinking. None reveals the full richness of prehistoric minds. The temptation to seek a single turning point remains strong. People naturally prefer clear beginnings. The first true human, the first language, the first artist, the first believer. Reality appears far more gradual. Evolution produces transitions rather than sharp boundaries. One generation differs only slightly from the previous one. Meaningful changes become visible only across hundreds or thousands of generations. Perhaps the greatest misconception is the idea that evolution moves toward predetermined goals. Nothing in the fossil record suggests that modern humans are inevitable. Climate could have shifted differently. Volcanic eruptions could have devastated critical populations. Disease, drought, or competition might easily have favored another branch of the human family. Neanderthals survived for hundreds of thousands of years. Homo erectus persists even longer. Denisovans adapt successfully across enormous territories. Our own species is only one participant in a far larger evolutionary experiment. What survives in the scientific record suggests that humanity's origins cannot be reduced to one discovery, one fossil, one migration, or one explanation. Instead, they emerge from the interaction of geology, climate biology, behavior, cooperation, innovation, and simple chance. Every theory contributes part of the answer. Every new excavation reshapes the conversation. The mystery endures precisely because the evidence continues growing. Rather than closing the book on human origins, modern science reveals just how many pages remain unwritten. Each generation of researchers inherits a story already extraordinary yet still unfinished, knowing that somewhere beneath untouched sediments, unexplored caves, submerged coastlines, or ancient African valleys, discoveries are waiting that may once again transform everything we believe about the first humans. The search for the first humans begins with scattered bones emerging from ancient sediments, but it ends somewhere far closer than most people expect. Every fossil, every footprint pressed into volcanic ash, every fragment of stone shaped by careful hands, ultimately leads back to the present. The mystery of humanity's beginnings is not simply the story of distant ancestors who vanished into prehistory. It is the story of every person alive today. Across millions of years of changing climates, disappearing landscapes, and countless generations that leave no names behind, an unbroken chain of life continues without interruption. Not one link in that chain can be removed without changing everything that follows. The first humans never know they are becoming the ancestors of billions. They wake before sunrise because survival demands it. They follow familiar animal trails towards seasonal water. They search for edible plants whose locations are remembered through experience rather than maps. Children learn by watching adults rather than reading books. Knowledge passes from hand to hand, from voice to voice, from memory to memory. Nothing they do seems extraordinary, yet almost every ordinary action contributes to the long accumulation of human experience. One generation discovers a more efficient way to shape stone. Another remembers where drought-resistant plants survive during harsh seasons. Another learns to cooperate during dangerous hunts. Still another carries these lessons farther into unfamiliar landscapes. Culture grows quietly, almost invisibly, until it becomes one of humanity's greatest evolutionary advantages. The remarkable success of modern humans is often described as though it were inevitable. Looking backward through history creates that illusion. Knowing the outcome makes every earlier event appear to lead naturally toward the present. The fossil record tells a different story. Again and again, ancient human populations face circumstances that could easily have ended their existence. Volcanic eruptions darken the skies. Drought transforms fertile valleys into barren landscapes. Disease spreads through vulnerable communities. Predators remain constant threats. Infants do not survive. Entire family groups disappear. At several points, genetic evidence suggests that humanity passes through severe population bottlenecks, with surprisingly few individuals contributing to later generations. Exactly how small these populations become remains debated, but what survives in the record suggests remarkable vulnerability rather than guaranteed success. Even our own species comes close to vanishing more than once. Climate oscillates dramatically during the Pleistocene. Ice sheets expand across vast regions of the northern hemisphere before retreating again. Sea levels rise and fall repeatedly. Grasslands become forests. Forests return to grasslands. The environment supporting one generation may disappear before the next reaches adulthood. Adaptation becomes less about perfection than resilience. Those capable of adjusting repeatedly to new circumstances leave descendants. Those unable to change often disappear regardless of previous success. Perhaps the greatest legacy of the first humans is not physical strength, exceptional intelligence, or advanced technology. It is adaptability. Humans survive because they learn, they cooperate, they observe, they remember. Unlike many specialized species, they are rarely confined permanently to one particular habitat. This flexibility eventually allows descendants to inhabit tropical rainforests, frozen tundra, high mountain plateaus, oceanic islands, deserts, and fertile river valleys. Long before cities exist, humanity has already become a traveller. Modern science continues revealing how deeply connected every living person remains to those ancient ancestors. The atoms composing the human body originate inside long-dead stars. The genes inherited from parents carry traces of migrations stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. Some people possess fragments of Neanderthal ancestry. Others inherit Denisovan adaptations. Many carry genetic signatures reflecting ancient climates, diets and diseases encountered by distant populations. Every genome preserves a record of journeys no written history remembers. Archaeology offers another quiet lesson. Civilizations often imagine themselves as separate from nature. The first humans remind us otherwise. Their lives remain inseparable from rivers, rainfall, animals, changing vegetation, and seasonal rhythms. Every environmental shift influences survival. Today, climate, biodiversity, and ecosystems continue shaping human societies, although technology sometimes creates the illusion that those connections have weakened. The deeper one looks into prehistory, the more obvious those relationships become. Humanity has never existed apart from the natural world. It has always been part of it. The mystery also teaches humility. For centuries, people assume that they already understand human origins. Again and again, new discoveries overturn confident conclusions. Neanderthals prove far more intelligent than once imagined. Denisovans emerge from almost invisible fossils. Ancient DNA transforms entire branches of anthropology. Previously unknown human populations appear where none are expected. Every decade reminds researchers that certainty remains temporary. Science advances not by defending old ideas, but by testing them continuously against new evidence. Perhaps the most profound realization is that the first humans are not fundamentally different from us. Their world is unimaginably distant in time, yet many of the qualities defining humanity already exist. Curiosity, cooperation, care for family, adaptation to uncertainty, the desire to explore unfamiliar landscapes, the ability to learn from experience, the instinct to leave knowledge for the next generation. These characteristics echo across hundreds of thousands of years. The tools change, the landscapes change, the languages change, but the underlying continuity remains remarkably strong. One day, future archaeologists, whether human or something entirely different, may study the remains of our own civilization. They will examine fragments of cities, altered landscapes, preserved technologies, and traces of our genes. Like today's scientists, they will work with incomplete evidence. Many stories will remain unknowable. Many assumptions will prove incorrect. They too will reconstruct the past from scattered clues while recognizing that most of history has already disappeared. That realization connects us unexpectedly with the first humans. Both they and we exist within only a brief moment of Earth's immense history. What survives is never the whole story, yet the fragments are enough to reveal something extraordinary. Across 7 million years of evolution, countless species rise and vanish. Entire ecosystems transform. Glaciers advance and retreat. Mountains lift toward the sky while coastlines disappear beneath rising seas. Against that immense backdrop, one fragile lineage persists, not because it is invincible, but because it repeatedly adapts to change. The first humans leave behind no monuments that rival pyramids, no written histories, and no names carved into stone. Their greatest achievement is something far less visible. They leave descendants. Every language spoken today, every piece of music ever composed, every scientific discovery, every work of art, every civilization, every voyage across oceans, and every question humanity asks about its own existence, begins with those anonymous people moving across ancient African landscapes beneath skies that looked both familiar and impossibly different. Their footprints fade long ago. Their voices fall silent. Their camps disappear beneath forests, deserts, rivers, and oceans. Yet in the deepest sense, they have never truly vanished. They continue walking quietly within every generation that follows, reminding us that the greatest mystery in human history is also the most personal one of all. The wind settles across the ancient landscape as though it has been blowing without interruption since the first footsteps crossed the soft ground millions of years ago. Rivers continue carving valleys long after the people who once drank from them disappear. Forests advance and retreat with changing climates. Deserts bloom briefly before returning to silence. Mountains slowly rise while coastlines sink beneath the sea. Through every transformation, the earth keeps its own patient rhythm, carrying forward the countless traces of lives that rarely know they are becoming history. The first humans never imagine that distant descendants will search for their footprints with satellites, microscopes, and laboratories. They never expect fragments of their bones to be studied beneath bright lights, or tiny pieces of their DNA to reveal journeys stretching across continents. They simply live within the landscapes available to them, responding to each season as it arrives, raising children, sharing food, adapting to uncertainty, and moving forward one day at a time. Their world feels immediate, not ancient. Tomorrow matters more than 10,000 years from now. Time quietly changes everything. The rivers they follow alter their courses. Volcanoes bury familiar paths beneath ash. Ice advances across northern lands before melting away again. Animals that once dominate entire continents disappear forever, while new species emerge to occupy the empty spaces left behind. Generation after generation, humanity changes alongside the world, often so gradually that no one notices the transformation while it is happening. What remains remarkable is not that every mystery has been solved, but that so much can still be known. A single footprint preserved in volcanic ash, a carefully shaped stone lying beside an ancient river, a child's tooth resting inside a cave, a strand of ancient DNA hidden within fragile bone. Each discovery is astonishingly small on its own, yet together they illuminate millions of years of shared history. They remind us that understanding the past is rarely about finding one dramatic answer. It is about patiently gathering countless small clues until a larger picture begins to emerge. Even now, much of that picture remains unfinished. Beneath deserts, forests, mountains, and oceans, unknown chapters almost certainly still wait. Future discoveries may redraw family trees, reveal forgotten migrations, or introduce entirely new branches of humanity that no one has yet imagined. The mystery of the first humans endures not because it cannot be explored, but because every answer opens another doorway leading deeper into the past. Perhaps that is the quiet beauty of this story. Humanity begins not with certainty, but with curiosity. The same curiosity that encourages early ancestors to follow unfamiliar valleys eventually inspires explorers to cross oceans, scientists to excavate ancient caves, and researchers to decode the invisible language written inside our genes. Across immense stretches of time, the desire to understand the world becomes one of our most enduring inheritances, and so the story gently returns to where it began. A landscape before cities, before writing, before kingdoms, before memory itself. Only a small group of upright figures moving across open ground beneath an endless sky, leaving footprints they never expect anyone to find. Those footprints fade from sight, yet they are never truly lost. They continue through every generation, carried quietly in our bodies, our minds, and our shared history, reminding us that the journey of humanity is not measured only by where we have arrived, but by the immeasurable distance already travelled. The first humans remain unseen beyond the horizon of time, yet their presence still lingers in every step we take today.